You're listening to the Hella Well with Danielle show, a podcast taking women of color on a journey exploring all things wellness and travel related. We're all about showing you how to put on your oxygen mask first and creating lasting self-care habits that will free you to travel the world and live the life you truly desire, and not one you have to fake loving. I'm your host, Danielle Washington. Now let's buckle up and start this journey. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hello Well with Danielle podcast. I am your host, Danielle Washington, and it's another Sunday, and it's another episode of the Hello Well with Danielle podcast. I'm feeling good. Today feels like summer. I got my little yellow dress on, and I wanted to share with y'all something that has really been a major change in my life that I was like, you know what? Why am I keeping this to myself? Like, that's being real, like, not shady, but I'm just trying to share. So I want to share with y'all. But before I share, again, I always like to say thank you and welcome to all those who are new to the podcast. If you have this is your first time listening, thank you. This is a podcast really focused in on creating a wellness revolution for women of color to get them to, stop putting everyone else before themselves. And like the airplane says, when you get on the plane, you do the little thing. It's like, put on your oxygen mask first and take care of you so you could be better to help everyone else and you. And so this podcast is really about wellness and travel for women of color and helping them, live the life that they truly desire instead of just surviving. I always say, let's not survive. Let's work on thriving. And if you are been here before and you're returning, I love you. I love you. I'm just really thankful and grateful for all people who continue watching. Last week's podcast was a little controversial. I had some people write comments that I'm like, ooh, who this? I don't know this person. It was kind of funny. No, it wasn't funny. I shouldn't say it was funny. But I respected the comments. I respected the comments I got in the podcast. If you didn't know, and you might want to listen to it, especially if you think about traveling, was about vaccination passports. And so I won't go into that because that's what this topic's about. Today's topic is all about habits. And if you think about it, there's a painful gap between what people say they want and what they actually do. And I'll be the first one to admit I'm up in that gap. And people say, oh, I want to live healthy, but they're at Chick-fil-A, they're eating, not saying Chick-fil-A is bad. I probably should I ain't trying to get sued. They're out eating, whatever, some fried chicken, or, they're having, getting some cupcakes and like, ooh, I really want, a couple of, martinis. And so, they're saying that they want to be healthy, but they're not eating right. They're not exercising, and they're not using their body or taking their body as their temple and their altar, but instead misusing and mistreating and not listening to their body. Another example I'll give is, a perfect thing about you saying the gap between what we say we want and what we actually do is this podcast. For me, I'm like, oh my God, I hella want this podcast to go viral. Like, I want more people to hear this podcast so more people can getting this information. But am I doing everything I could be doing to make sure that this podcast goes viral? Nah, sis, I'm not. And I recognize that. I'm like, my habits aren't matching up with what I'm saying I want. So there's a huge gap in between oftentimes what we say we want and what we're actually doing. But what if I told you that it's not us. It's not us that's doing something wrong. Like, whatever you're doing is actually not the changes that you're making or trying to make aren't your fault. Like the failures of you, like, I want to lose weight. And you all of a sudden you try and you fail. And it's, what if I was able to tell you that it's not the fact that you're trying to change, but what if I told you it was the way you were trying to change your habits were like hella wrong, like just crack crazy, wrong answer. What if I told you that was the case? What if I told you that there's a hella easier way that if you knew about this, you'd be like, dude, why didn't I think about this? Why am I just hearing about this? If I knew about this, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like a month ago, my life would be changed. What if I told you there's something that's so embarrassingly easy that can really change everything in your life? Would you guys want to know about it? My guess is the answer is yes. And if it's not, continue listening. You may learn something. If it is yes, this is today's topic and you're going to want to hear about it. So I am talking about some things I got from a book called, I'm looking at my notes because I want to make sure I get it right. Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything. It's by Dr. B.J. Fogg, who is a behavioral scientist at Stanford University, who is literally, this book is a game changer. If you go to hellowellwithdanielle.com and go to the podcast notes, you'll see a link for the book. I highly, highly, highly recommend getting the book. It's just the way he thinks and the way he breaks down creating habits that are lifelong lasting, that make, long-term changes is really different than everything we've ever heard. And so I'll start off, I'll kind of give you his information, whatever. But the basic premise of the book is stop blaming yourself for your failure to change. And I love that he says that. He's like, we're not the problem. Our approach to how we make change is the problem. So basically what he's saying is it's a design flaw. It ain't us. It's not personal. It's not a personal flaw on us. It's a design flaw that we've all bought into, is this is the way you make changes in your life. These are the way to make lasting behavior changes. And he's saying, nope, stop. You're doing it wrong. And it's not your fault that you're doing it wrong, but you're doing it wrong. And he explains how to do it right. And, summarizing of what his way of doing it right is basically saying is take a behavior, make it tiny, find a way to fit it naturally in your life, and then nurture that stuff so it continues to grow, expand, and keep doing it. And of course, I'm saying this super easier. I'm going to break down exactly how he goes about doing it. But why tiny? Why tiny? Why make habits tiny? Why make tiny actions or small actions? And the whole point that he says of why making tiny habits works and why it is something that can, change everything. He says it's tiny, making things tiny is fast. You can start now, it's safe, tiny, things can grow, it reduces the dependence on willpower and motivation, and it's transformative. And, his method of doing everything is called the Fogg behavior model. So it's B equals map, or B equals motivation plus ability plus prompt. And the motivation is, your desire to perform the behavior. Ability is your capacity to perform the behavior. And prompt, which is really interesting, is the cue that initiates the behavior. And one thing that I got out of this that was really powerful is that no behavior happens without a prompt. And I'm like, never thought about that one. And the other thing that I thought was really cool was that he was saying that we overestimate the power of motivation and willpower. And I think we totally do. If you think about New Year's Eve, and everyone has that high motivation to do these things, but then when it comes, that's January 1, but when it comes to January 15th, if you're lucky to get to January 15th, that motivation goes up from here down below, and then you're like, oh, you don't have the motivation anymore, and so you stop doing it. And so, but we always think, oh, if I just have the desire, the strong will to want to change things in my life, the will to stop smoking, the will to, grow my business, I'm going to be able to do it. And the reality that he's saying is that ain't it, sis. Willpower is great. Motivation is great. And it is important in this, but it's not everything. I think of willpower as I'm a Project Runway, old school girl. So I was I feel like motivation is one day you're in, the next day you're out. One day your motivation's up high, the next day it's not. And when it's not, you're not going to do that behavior. And that behavior goes gone and out the window. And you're like, dang, I failed. Because you were relying so much on motivation as your way of getting through it. And the reality check is motivation is unreliable. And he says that motivation is unreliable. Habits based on motivation alone is just as good as the motivation. So your habit, if you're really focusing only on motivation, being the fuel behind changing your behavior, the changes in the behaviors are only as good as your motivation. It's not, motivation is not a great way to go about creating long-term changes. And it won't yield the results you want. So you kind of need to be more specific. And then the other part of like the whole behavior equals motivation plus ability. And let's get into the ability. And ability was your capacity to perform a behavior. And if you think about this, I want you to start thinking about some questions to start getting yourself in the mindset, kind of coming up with how can you do this? And so one of the questions he says you should ask yourself is, what is making the behavior so hard to do? So think about it, do I have enough time? Is there enough money? Am I physically able to do the behavior? Does the behavior require me to have a certain, mental or energy change or kind of capacity of some of that sort and like that? Or does the behavior fit into my routine currently? Or do I need to adjust my schedule or routine to make it fit? And what Fogg calls these is the ability factors. So it's time, money, physical effort, mental effort, and routine. And what he's saying in this book is figure out if there's a behavior trying to change, and then you ask yourself all these questions and you look at the ability factors, which one is the weakest link in all this? And whatever the weakest link in that kind of situation is, so say it's, I want to talk about the podcast. So I want to grow the podcast, but I don't have enough money to pay for ads and stuff like that. So it's money. So whatever the weakest link is, figure that out and then work on that and address that situation. But then after that, he's like, okay, you've gone through and looked at the ability factors and figured out whatever the weakest link is. Secondly, he says, to help you encourage that behavior, ask yourself, how can I make the behavior easier to do? So ask yourself and really kind of give yourself some time. It's a great journaling point. And I actually should put this in the journaling. So if you're new, again, each podcast, I always do journal prompts in the show notes. So I will actually make this question one of the questions in the journal prompt because I think this is a good question. So ask yourself, how can I make this behavior easier to do? And there's three quick ways to make a behavior easier to do. They talks about is, gain a skill. So learn something, like increase your skill set, get tools and resources. And then the obvious one is make the behavior tiny. And what he means by that, and I probably should explain this a little bit earlier, is by making the behavior tiny, lower the bar that it's so freaking easy that it's like my 5-year-old. I don't have a 5-year-old, but if I had a 5-year-old, my 5-year-old can do it. And the one thing to think about it is, like, one example he says about making a habit so easy is he talks about flossing his teeth. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so he's like, okay, the one way he does about flossing teeth is like the behavior, he made a goal is like, I want to floss teeth. Instead of saying, I'm going to floss all my teeth, he's like, I'm going to make the effort to floss one. Or he talks about, if your goal or behavior that you want to do is, I want to walk. Or, the bigger one is, I want to be healthy. Okay, we break this down to, I'm going to walk every day, or I'm going to walk X amount of days, whatever. And instead of, and he says that is still too big. He's like, continuously make it smaller. So lower the bar so much. So if the bar here is, I want to be healthy. The next bar is, I want to walk. He's like, lower the bar so dang low that it's ridiculous that there's just no way you cannot do it. An example of that, with that being the walking one, is like, just put on your shoes, put on your walking shoes. And like how hard is it just to put on your walking shoes? He didn't say go outside. He didn't say walk. He didn't say open the door. He said put on the walking shoes. And then celebrate that. Imagine that, just putting on your walking shoes. And that will help you get to the larger goals that you want to be by just doing something creating the bar so freakingly low that it's like, of course I can do this. And you're not, when you have these habits you're trying to change and you're trying to create, and it's so foreign to you and it's so new and it's not associated with anything you're already doing, it's hard to do. And like, I think about meditation being one of those. Meditation, a lot of people want to meditate, but part of the problem with meditation is there's like no reward behind it. They're kind of their head. They're like, there's no way of knowing if you're doing it right. And so it's foreign. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of going more into that. But like, there's reasons why when you try to do something that's so crazy out of the norm from what you're doing, not saying you can't do that, you're going to easily fail. So he says, start off crazy low, set that bar hecka low. And that is the way to start, with tiny habits to get you going. So I don't know, the way I like to think about it and the way he talks about it in the book, and I kind of really appreciated this, was Fogg talks about motivation and ability being like teammates. If one is weak, the other one has to be strong. You think about if Jordan and Pippen, if Jordan was having a bad day, Pippen had to be really good. Otherwise, they were going to lose the game. And if you don't know what I'm talking about basketball. But like motivation, so if your motivation is low, the ability to do it, whatever you're trying to change, or the behavior needs to be stupid easy. And vice versa. If your ability to do it is low, so say your ability to, I don't know, roller skate backwards is low, but the motivation has to be really high. And the easier it is to do the behavior, the more likely that it's going to become a habit. The other part of all this is that he talks about no habit or behavior happens without a prompt. And we have prompts all the time. If you think about it, there are daily habits that we do constantly. If you think about it, and the way, like, examples of prompts are, when you're hungry, what do? Duh, you eat. If your alarm goes off, boop, you hit the alarm and you get up and you wake up. If there's a stop sign, you look both ways. And if you don't, I don't want to be on the road with you. So please let me know in the DMs that you don't stop at stop signs and look both ways. Because if you aren't, you're probably going to get an accident. But those are so, like, things that automatically, if like you're getting on the freeway, you don't just get on the freeway without looking if there's cars. You automatically do these things. So there's prompts to the behaviors that we have that we don't even think about. And there's tons of these that we do on a day-to-day basis. Like, you wake up, you go to the bathroom. You go to the bathroom, most likely prompt, flush the toilet. So again, he calls these things prompts, or, think about them prompts or triggers, some habits that trigger other things. And the way he talks, Fogg tells us to do, is to tie your new habits that you're trying to change or create or add onto your life to these triggers / prompts that you're already doing. And the formula behind that is, so say, after I do blank, the anchor habit, I will do blank. And so we go back to the example, that one example he gives in the book. So that was a little bit off, but I was like, okay, boo, I see you. I'm like, I don't know why you would do this. And it just seems off, but I'm going to go with it. So after, Fogg talks about in the book, like after he goes to the bathroom, he does some push-ups, and he's been doing it for like, I think 7 years or so. So if you go with the formula, it's like after I do anchor habit, and the anchor habit is going to the bathroom, I will do blank. And the new habit in his new habit is do like 2 push-ups. So after he pees, he will do 2 push-ups, and that works for him. And so, for me, one of the habits I've been doing in this situation is after I wake up in the morning, and then after I wake up in the morning, I go to the bathroom. First thing I do is I brush my tongue, which is part of my dosha. And so I starting my morning routine based off of my dosha. And I should do a podcast one day on dosha, and I'll put in the notes something about dosha so you guys can understand it. But it's your Ayurvedic way of living. And so, and there's 3 different types of doshas, and I'm Vata. And so I start my day based off of what would be good for my dosha. So I start off with, I brush the toxins off of my tongue. And right after I brush the toxins off of my tongue, that triggers, that's prompt. So after I do brush my tongue, I will brush my teeth, and which also then hits another trigger. After I brush my teeth, I will drink water. And I have other little triggers, but those are the things that I consistently do every single morning. And that's little tiny habits I got to get to living a way that works for me, that fits into the dosha lifestyle that I'm trying to live. But those were the tiny habits that I added into my schedule that helped me kind of get to a place where I feel good, because I love a good morning routine. And when I don't do my full morning routine, my day is off. My day is completely off. And again, what helps me stick to my morning routine or my evening routine or just routines in general is by having these tiny habits and these prompts that help me. If I do this, I then do that. And he talks about the power of the prompt. And it's, the power of the prompt that he talks about is that you're already doing this. These are things that that exist in your day already. So you're not creating new habits from scratch, which is great. You can try these things immediately and see results. And then like things to consider when doing these things. And this is what I thought was really kind of cool that he brought this up, because I'm like, oh yeah, not every, anchor habit fits with every new habit. And the way he brought it up is like, think about things to consider is like location and frequency. It's like, bathroom. He doesn't, why are you doing push-ups in a bathroom? But maybe he's going somewhere else. But like if you were at work, you're not going to go to the bathroom and then, do some push-ups somewhere. So that may not work at work, but it may work at home. And then frequency, if it's something you're trying to do, if you're trying to add a behavior that you want to do several times a day. So like if you want to, take some deep breaths, or you want to drink more water, you want to attach those new behaviors to something you do often as well. So attach those, behaviors, those new habits to a prompt that you do multiple times a day. So think of things you do multiple times a day and then attach those new habits to those prompts. And so one example he gives is like, which is kind of a recipe for epic failure, which I totally get, is like, after I brush my teeth, I sweep the garage. Like, who the F is going to be sweeping the garage right after brush your teeth? I mean, someone might do it. I wouldn't do it, but it doesn't match. The location doesn't match. The frequency doesn't match. And like, it's just the purpose doesn't match whatsoever. But however, you can say, after I drink water, I will water my plant. And because it matches, because you're watering yourself, you're hydrating yourself. Oh yeah, which triggers me to water my plants, which depending on your plant, you might be killing your plants. I have a peace lily. I know I can't water that thing every single time I drink water. So it doesn't match exactly, but it's something to kind of think in that realm. So you need to make sure that the purpose, the location, the frequency, all kind of matches, so it's not kind of out there. And then the way to think about it is also kind of going back to what we talked about. So I talked about, motivation and ability kind of being like teammates. If your motivation is high and the thing is hard to do, you may or may not get it done. If the motivation is high and it's easy to do, you're more likely to get it done. If it's easy to do, but your English and your motivation is low, you're more likely to get it done. If it's easy to do and your motivation's high, yeah, it's a high possibility that you're going to get this done. And that's kind of the way he thinks about it. So again, the Fogg behavior model is behavior equals motivation plus ability plus the prompt, which is all kind of cool. And one thing to kind of put together, like when you're kind of doing this and troubleshooting your behavior, is again to check to see, is there a prompt to the behavior? Do I have the ability to do the behavior? Am I motivated to the behavior? And that will kind of help you kind of think about, when you're trying to create these changes. So we talked about all his model for doing it. And let's get into the fun and the meat of it. And like, these are the steps to the tiny habits. And this was really key for me. And it's super easy. And it's so easy. And I'm like, duh, why didn't I think about this? I could have been rich if I came up with this ideal. And I'm like, it's so simple. You almost think like, why am I not doing this? So the 3 steps that, Fogg talks about to creating tiny habits is anchoring your new behavior to existing behavior. So we talked about that kind of already. make it tiny, and do something immediately to celebrate and that you did a good job. And I love this part because what he's talking about that I think no one else is talking about is, or what he says, I should say, is he says emotions create and reinforce habits. And it's not about repetition or frequency. I think what I've been sold so many times is that the more you do something, it's going to become a habit, the more repetition, the frequency, and that you should only try to do one habit at a time. And I've actually said this in other podcasts until I read this book. I've come from the school of reading or been told that, oh, you should only try to do change one habit at a time. And, the more you do it, the more it's going to happen. And it's not about that. That's not what creates habit. What he's saying is what Fogg is saying it creates habit is emotions create habit. And this is such a mind-blowing kind of philosophy. And then he says that there's a direct connection between what you feel when you do a behavior and the likelihood that you'll repeat the behavior in the future. Again, there's a direct connection between what you feel when you do a behavior and the likelihood that you'll repeat the behavior in the future. And that makes sense if you think about it. When you feel good about something and you have that feel good feeling like, yeah, I did that. That's going to make you want to do it again. Like I remember first time I was never speaking. And the first time I spoke on a stage and I was presenting and I was like, oh my God, that felt good. Because before I was like, no, I don't do that. I don't speak in public because I'm shy. No one believes me when I say I'm shy, but I am shy. But that feeling felt good. That made me want to do that behavior again. And what Fogg is telling us that we need to learn to recognize, our success and, that feel good feeling and celebrate it. And not just celebrate it in the sense of, you think about when you got good grades back in the day and your parents, after you got your grades, so you would do all the work for months. And then your parents are like, okay, here's, $50. So that's not doing an incentive. He says we need to reward ourselves immediately. You need to celebrate immediately to help make that behavior a habit. And some of the ways he talks about is a fist pump. It's easy as just doing a fist pump. It's easy as, give yourself a sound. He's like, dun, da, da, da. For me, I'm like, yes, queen, you did that. I'm like, great job, sis. I'm like, I see you. These are ways I go about celebrating, but figure out what works for you. And he says, have something special, for ones that are really kind of tough. He does this thing where he thinks about his fourth grade teacher and you did a great job, BJ. My fourth grade teacher was a hard ass and she scared me. My first Black teacher. So I don't think she'd be the one who, shout out to Miss Hollis in Foster City. I don't think she'd be the one who I want to be hearing in my voice. But if there's someone's voice or someone who really matters to you and having them say, hey, sis, you did an amazing job. Keep that in mind as whatever you celebrate. But he's saying, you have to celebrate immediately, and that will put you into a positive mindset that will reinforce the good behaviors and it'll get you to want to do it more. And you don't have to do the celebration all the time. So he's like, once you make this habit, once you make the behavior an actual habit and becomes automatic, you don't have to celebrate. Because once it becomes automatic, he's like, there's no need to celebrate. But in order to make it automatic, to make the behavior a habit, you need to celebrate immediately. And what he talks about, the way he describes it, the term he comes up with is the immediate feeling of success upon completing a positive behavior. He's calling it shine. And so he's like, you need to have that shine. And I like that. It's shine, this feeling. And he talks about that no one before has really kind of created a term around that feeling of success that you get upon completing a positive behavior. And it's have that shine. And that shine makes you feel good. Yes. And for me, at one point of things, and one of the things I do say to myself, I'm like, girl, I see you shining. I'm like, okay, girl, I see you shining. So the word he uses, shine. And I do love that word because it makes you feel good. And, another word could be joy, whatever you want to do. But what he calls the immediate feeling of success upon completing a positive behavior is shine. So make sure you're shining after you do the habit. So again, it's come up with, tie your new habit to something you're already doing. So anchor it to something you're already doing. Make it tiny, make it the bar so dang low that the ability is so crazy easy to do. And then make sure that you're celebrating this. And so after reading, while I was in the midst of reading the book, I'm like, okay, I get, the 3 ways to kind of, make a tiny habit. But then I was like, oh, how is he going about doing this? Like, how is he picking? How do you know that it is a tiny habit? And what he uses is what is kind of brainstorming technique called magic wanding. I don't know if that's his or not, but he calls it magic wanding. And that's how he goes about picking the tiny habits. And think about it this way. So create a list create a behavior that you want to change. So, or you want to make. So say you have the behavior that, I don't know, let's think of behavior. Why am I thinking of behavior? Behavior I want to change or I want to make. So I want the behavior I want to do is I want to change how I talk to myself. Bet. Okay. So, or actually, no, let's do something easier. That's easier. So we'll go back to the exercise one. I want to be healthier. So that's really vague. And he's always talking about being specific. And so but you're saying, if your thing is, I want to behave or I want to reduce stress, we'll talk about reduce stress. So put it in the middle of the page. I want to reduce stress, and then put in spokes around it. All the different things you can do to reduce stress. You can, get paid more. You can meditate. You could take a trip somewhere. You can get off of social media. And so all these different things that you can do to reduce stress. And then next thing you want to do is put a star by all the things that will have a high impact on creating the behavior that you desire. Next, after you do that, circle all the behaviors that are easy for you to do, the ability that goes to the ability side of things. And then third, underline the behaviors that you're most likely to do. Because there's some things you're most likely not going to do. You're like, I'm not going to take a trip. I mean, that's not me, but to reduce stress. And maybe I wouldn't. I don't think I would take a trip to reduce stress. I don't know. Yeah, I probably would. I don't need many reasons or excuses to take a trip. So it's like, think of the things that, star the things that are high impact, circle the things that are, easy for you to do, the high ability for easy for you to do, and then underline the things that you're most likely to do. Then look at the things that you have on this piece of paper. Anything that has all 3 of those things, or at least 2 of the 3, those are the ones you're going to want to focus on first. Those are the ones that have high impact, that the ability to do it, you feel like I can do this, and then you're motivated to do it. Because if you pick something that, it's great, it looks high impact, but the ability for you to do it or the motivation for you to do it isn't there, again, the likelihood of you making those changes isn't really high. And so you need to consider those when you're kind of putting this together. So, and then the other thing I think I love talking about was he talked about how do you disrupt behaviors. And I didn't want to go really far into that, but then he talks about, again, no behavior, is without a prompt. So for you to disrupt a behavior, you want to look to removing some of the prompts. And so that's something to consider. Again, read the book, because he goes in, the book is, it's not long, but some parts of the book, so this is hella wordy. And I'm it took me a little bit to get through it. But the information and the meat of the information of tiny habits was just really, really good. And it's just something you can, again, listen to this podcast. And from here, start making these changes today. Literally, these are some easy things you can start doing today that can make a huge life-changing difference in your life. And I love that, it's just the way that we've been doing it. We've been taught that, you need to do this often. You need to do one thing. Motivation is everything. I just have the willpower. I have the willpower to do it, to make these changes, and I'm going to succeed. And it's not all about motivation. I've never really thought about it as, okay, motivation matters, but my ability of doing it And, what impact has it in like putting it all together and making it so small. And once you make it small, so we talked about, the first step in the walking thing is putting on the shoes. And most likely if you put on the shoes, at that point you're like, well, maybe I'll just go for a walk. And maybe you won't. And if you don't end up putting on the shoes and going for the walk, he talks about, start asking yourself, okay, why am I not doing this? Maybe this isn't the right thing, and question the motivation and the ability. And maybe it wasn't the right tiny task or tiny, action. And it's okay to change it. It's okay to do these things and set these things up and reevaluate and be like, okay, this wasn't the right thing for me. What can I do that's different? And then, it's if you're not seeing you progressing to something else and giving yourself grace and time to progress to something else. And so kind of keep those things in mind. So key takeaways from all this, and creating habits, and changing behaviors is stop judging yourself. Stop judging yourself. We are not flawed. The way we've been doing things are flawed. It's not you. It is the system. Willpower and motivation aren't enough to create lasting changes. Take your aspirations and start crazy small with small behaviors, small tiny behaviors and changes that you anchor to current actions that you're doing right now. Emotions create change, not your repetition of doing it. Make sure that you're celebrating the behaviors immediately until they become habits, and then embrace the mistakes and mishaps in creating the habits so you can discover ways that you can do things differently and move forward. I'm hoping y'all got something from this, because this again has been so huge and just like the little things that I do every single day. And it's just made a difference in how I'm able to show up in what I'm doing and the things I want to achieve in my life. Because before I was just like, okay, I have this high goal. I can do it because I'm motivated, because I'm a go-getter. I'm this, I'm that. I'm a hustler. Ain't nothing about hustling. If you ain't got the ability, if the motivation isn't consistent, because the motivation will never be consistent. It's very rare your motivation to do everything is consistent. I love this podcast. I thoroughly love giving you guys information and interviewing different people. But there's some days like I'm hungover. Well, I'm always hungover, but like I'm tired. I have, other things that are conflicting with my ability to do this. The neighbors upstairs are stupid, crazy loud. And so the motivation may not always be at a 10. It may be at a 7. And so it just changes. And it doesn't mean that I don't desire to do something, but my motivation may change. And so me depending on motivation and willpower ain't always the way to go about it. So anyway, that's this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you aren't aware, this podcast is now on YouTube, so you can see me in my little cute outfit, or I think it's cute. So you can go to YouTube and go to the Hello Well with Danielle page, and you can find me there. I'm always on Clubhouse every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, doing a wisdom and wine session with my girls every Wednesday. Just chatting it out. You can find me on Instagram, and I'm just out in these streets, and I'm on TikTok. Just got on TikTok. Not sure how this is working out, but I'm starting to do more TikToks, and I just want to find different ways to make sure y'all thriving. This is all about you thriving, living your best life. And so on that note, have a beautiful week, and I will see y'all next Wednesday. I'm like, nope, I will see you next Sunday. All right, ciao. Thanks for joining us this week on the Hello Well with Danielle show. Make sure to visit our website, hellowellwithdanielle.com, where you can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music and never miss an episode. Also, you can follow us on social media at Hello Well with Danielle on Facebook and Instagram, and Hello Well Danny on Twitter. And if you like hella love the show and got some good nuggets out of it, know that I'm not too proud to ask for you to please leave a rating or review on iTunes so that we can continue to expand our reach and help other women of color. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Ciao.